Hello to all my booty seekers and cheek chasers. This is the Carpe Natem Podcast. I am your host, Nate Della Hoya-Reynoso, and I am so grateful you are listening to this episode. If you're new here, you should know that I believe that my purpose is to uplift, inspire, and educate others to communicate masterfully so that they can better understand themselves and the world around them. I've spent years in the personal development and transformational technology space, and I want to share with you the wisdom that was passed down to me from giants in the industry. So if you're on a journey of self-mastery, just like me, looking to make dreams a reality and willing to be a leader for your family and community, then join me in seizing the butt cheeks of life and giving them a big ol' squeeze. Let's jump into the show. Welcome back, everyone, to an episode of Carpe Natem. I am so excited to have this guest on this podcast. He doesn't like being addressed by any of his business titles, so I will call him an amazing human, an amazing father, and an amazing friend. This is Christian Höferle, who is also the founder of Cultural Mastery, and some people may know him as the Culture Guy. This man is smarter than your average bear, if your average bear also was a fucking genius, because this dude just stands above it all. I love to talk to this man. So full of knowledge, so full of wisdom. Christian, welcome.
Oh, man. Thank you for that intro. That's awesome. He was smarter than a bear.
So for the people who are listening who don't know too much about you and about your business, we would love to know, like, what do you do and what your business is about?
My business is, as you said, the Culture Mastery, and it is about helping people master culture. And why do they want to do that? Because they work in an international context, either because they choose to move abroad for love, life, and other reasons, or because their employer decides, hey, we need your expertise abroad for a project, or because they work on a team of people that consists of team members that are not like them, because they speak a different language, they come from a different country, or from maybe a different ethnicity, or a different generation, or different religion, or simply are not like them. And it's easy for people to engage with people who are similar to us. Those who are different from us, we have sometimes some tendency to engage, which doesn't help us if we want to each other in a global context. And we help our clients to get better at that and eventually master that.
And I can attest to your knowledge because I've actually called upon you for some questions when I was dealing with a business issue with another country. And you had come in and just really just dropped a bunch of knowledge bombs on me and my team, letting us know about the different types of ethnic groups in the region, how each one is likes to be spoken to. You gave us such amazing knowledge. And it felt like if it was almost off cuff, like you already just had that in your tool belt. And that's amazing because you're able to draw upon like a vast knowledge of multiple cultures. Can I ask, do you have like a top 3 favorite that you really enjoy learning about or experiencing?
Yeah, I wish I could say like that. Let me back that up a little bit. So first of all, you might hear my English does not sound like native US English. It is not my first language. So my first language, the one that I spoke growing up in my family, is German, because that's where I was born and raised. So I'm German by birth. I'm US by choice. And I also add to that, I'm Bavarian at heart, which only makes sense if you're familiar with the regionality of European culture. So my native culture is Bavaria, which is a state of Germany. It's like in the US, you would be saying, well, I'm a New Yorker, or I'm from California, or I'm a Texan. So no, I'm Bavarian. And that in the greatest scheme of things, that is important because that's an important distinction. It's not just German. I have a keen interest in learning about human behavior that might be similar to mine and that might be completely different. And I want to find out which is which. And I attended an international networking event just this week. And I was standing in a group of people as is usual at these events. There was fellow US people, there were two Russian ladies, and a Japanese lady entered the group, handed out her business card, and I was the only person in that group of people. In receiving her card, I extended both of my hands to grab her card, and I didn't just put the card away in my back pocket. No, I looked at the card for a few seconds and nodded and appreciated the information on it and carefully put it into a safe place with other business cards, because I knew that with somebody from Japan, this was the respectful thing to do. Now, I only know this because I've been interacting with Japanese before, and I did so because I had this interest, because I intuitively knew Japanese culture is quite different from US or Central European culture. So I was drawn to that. Ask my wife and my daughters, they will tell you that whenever we're in public and daddy hears a language that is not English or German, I bend my ear. It's almost like somebody was fishing me, and then the hook is in my ear, and I want to get closer to hear what language are they speaking, and maybe is there a chance to begin an interaction, to which my family is by now like scared, like, oh, daddy's going to talk to them again and we'll never get out of this place, because he overwhelms them with his curiosity. But that's who I am. I want to know.
I love it. I love how you have such a passion for this. Where did it stem from? Where did it start? Because it looks like it's something that you're genuinely drawn to. And it sounds like something that you almost have. I wouldn't say almost have. It is a passion. You definitely have a passion for it.
Yeah, I don't know where it comes from. I've been asking myself that. I usually explain it to myself with my teenage life, because I was a foreign exchange student at the age of 17. I had a chance to spend a whole year in the United States as a high school student. And that's when my blinders came off. And I mean, like the blinders that horses wear, so they stay on course. And this is what I felt like up until then, that I had only seen one direction, one lane. And then living in another culture, in another country, those blinders came off. And I realized, oh, wait a second, you can do stuff differently and still get results. So there is not just one way of doing it. There is not the concept of normal is arbitrary, and you can't see this, but I'm putting normal in air quotes, because normal is such a man-made, abstract, arbitrary concept. There's thousands, if not millions, of sets of normal behavior. They're simply not normal outside of your habitat, right? Mm-hmm. So when I was a teenager experiencing my normal being challenged and coexisting with another set of normal and becoming okay with the fact, okay, you can do this multiple ways and still get to where you want to go and still have a result. Interesting. How many more normals out there are there? So maybe that was what started this. But maybe it started sooner than that, and I don't remember, and I have no cognitive connection to that.
I actually do have a couple of questions. Something that came up, especially when you speak on the idea what is normal for one is totally different for someone else. Something that I noticed that ranges heavily across countries is like adult and sexual content specifically, where some places are really weird about showing legs and thighs and wrists, and other places are very concerned about showing cleavage. Other places blur out body parts. Other places don't show those body parts ever. What is really what is making the disparity across these things so different? Like, why is one culture, and I guess it's a very loaded question, but why is one culture, because I guess the reason I'm even asking this question is because the United States seems like it's very free with what we show. But we have such a huge conservative Protestant religion kind of base where it's like there's this need to censor, but we're probably the most showy. And then there's other countries that don't have that, but they'll be very, very strict when it comes to like sexual things.
Yeah. Yeah, it fits the title of your show too, Carpe Natem. So we're gonna grab that buttock and shake.
Talk about the butts from different cultures.
Let's talk about the butts. Well, I can't tell you a complete answer about the why. let me approach it though a little bit. I think you hit the nail when you said religion. So I think religion has a lot to do with it, and the morals that come with a spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm.
I think it also comes with the idea of whether a culture values independence and individualism, or whether a culture values group coherence and collectivism. And that's one of those main behavioral traits that we look at in our cultural comparison frameworks. The US, most Anglo-Saxon cultures, US, Canada, the UK, Australia, even South Africa, New Zealand to a certain degree, they rank really, really heavy on the individualist, independent side. And on the opposite end of that spectrum, you have cultures like Mexico, or all of or most of South America. A lot of cultures, a lot of sub-Saharan African cultures are quite group focused. So whenever there is the idea of saving and keeping the honor of a member of the group, saving face, exposure of body parts might be seen as a violation of that honor of face. So that is to be protected at all costs. And prop on top of that religious practices, and you have a more restrictive moral code. And compare that to an individualistic society like the United States, where everything is free to do as long as you don't interfere with somebody else's freedom, then doing you is okay, I guess, to a certain degree. What I found interesting, though, being a German, having moved to the United States, in comparing those moral standards, I chuckle a little bit when you say that we're so free here in the US.
Right, because I know Germany's known for like their harder core porn. Like they go kind of hard in that thing.
I wouldn't know about that, but I'll tell you that Germans are very open about nudity in public. They don't care as much as Americans do. So
and that's the other thing that I notice in America too, is that a lot of the people on TV and in magazines are basically nude, but then when somebody is nude in public, everyone freaks out. And it could be as simple as like a mother feeding her child.
Yeah.
Where in like Latin cultures, it seems like it's embraced, it's honored. It's like the more revealing, the more busty, the more beautiful. Like they want to put you on a pedestal and show the entire world, like, look what we have in our country. While other places are just more like moderate conservative, but there is a different level of freedom. And I wish I could experience Europe sometime in my lifetime. I would love to, because the way they communicate with each other, amongst each other and amongst the different countries, is way different than how we communicate with each other here in the US. And this is just from my experience in talking to like immigrants or people visiting. It's there. Can you talk a little bit about kind of some of the keynotes of like maybe why, and even maybe why some of this exists?
Well, one of the first things I noticed was that there's a higher level of censorship when it comes to nudity and sexuality in media and in public in the United States that I was not familiar with as a teenager, having grown up in Germany. What surprised me on the other end was how openly or how accessible fairly violent content is in the United States. So you can watch movies that are quite gory with lots of blood and brain matter and bone sawing, and that is still okay for a fairly young teenage audience, apparently, which would be totally rated X, triple X in Germany. And you show one nipple, female nipple that is, and the whole world goes crazy. Whereas in Germany, like nobody bats an eye. And you go into a public sauna, mixed gender public sauna. Yeah. Everybody's in there naked, complete strangers, all ages, nobody cares. Everybody's butt naked as long as you don't sit your sweaty ass down on the wooden planks. You gently put a towel out there so to keep the hygiene, but you use the sauna as it was intended, to sweat out everything with as little garment as possible, preventing the sweat, right? So the moral standards are neither good nor bad. They're normal for the people within one culture, and I don't label them as right or wrong. I simply accept what is. You cannot change culture from the outside. You can observe it, you can adjust your own behavior to it as much as possible. You will not always be able to become that way or completely change your behavioral experience, but you can bend that a little bit. It's almost like a rubber band that you can stretch, but if you overstretch it, it will snap and you don't feel like you're yourself anymore. But I'm really hesitant to call out some of these behaviors right or wrong or good or bad. They are. Yeah. Culture is. And the more we come to terms with it and the more we try to recognize what's going on, the easier it will be. I typically tell our clients, this is not about do's and don'ts, because this is often what they come to us with first. Oh, we need to know, our people need to know the do's and don'ts of the Emirates. Sure, they do, but you don't need me for that technically. You can buy a book or download an app for that. Thank you, Internet, there's ways to find out about this. Knowing the do's and don'ts will not make it easier for you to accept and appreciate what to do and what not to do. Mm-hmm. So we tell our clients that you want to know the why, the underlying reason that creates the do or not do. And if you understand the why, whether you like the do or do not, doesn't matter. But if you understand the why, the do's and don'ts become more accessible to you. You can now reason with it. You say, okay, I don't like this behavior, but I get the reason why they're doing it that way, so I can respect that, right? So do's and don'ts is quite superficial. Digging deeper into the why is where the magic is.
What would you say to the people who are currently, and I've seen a lot of these people saying that, like, by trying to experience a different person's culture, it's a cultural appropriation? Because I notice there's a lot of, and it may just come with possibly the US's culture, where it's very in right now to be a victim and to be upset at everything without actually knowing your history or checking in the relevance of like what you're saying. For example, braids, right? I have my hair braided right now. There are some people who would rather I not have that because they think that that belongs to a certain race, which is ridiculous because braids have been done since the beginning of man. Like, there are cultures of all colors and races that do braids. And it's not just braids, it's other examples too, where colors and sections and things that can't be, sometimes it can be seen as respectful. Sometimes it seems like it's almost distasteful. Right. What do you say to that?
I think the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and the judgment is upon those who feel that they have the power to judge others. I'm careful to call cultural appropriation out as such. Because I'm a white male who is part of the demographics in the world that for a century has enjoyed privileges like nobody else. So there is very little of my culture that I feel has ever been misappropriated. As a German, I kind of have a knee jerk to being labeled as Nazi, or if something is put into the comparison with Nazi German history in order to flag something as negative. I have a strong reaction to that because nothing compares to the horrors of the Nazi period. So comparing something else to it is diminishing the pain of the victims of the Nazis. So I would refrain from that. But when it comes to your example, braids, so would you identify, you, Nate, personally, do you identify as a person of color, or would you identify as Caucasian white in the US context?
I'm a person of color, yeah. Because Caucasian, and then I've noticed that too in the census, where it's just like, what's your race? And there's like Caucasian white, Native American, Alaskan, Black, and then there's none for
Latino, Latinx, yeah,
right. I actually don't really like the idea of Latinx. I think and this is something that we can talk about. I feel like because the language is so beautiful, and because of like what is used to speak when like communicating, that ends up like messing up communication and makes it like clunky while the language itself is so, I understand the intention behind it, but I feel like the removing of like gendered language, it's because I feel like American English is just so objective, while languages like French and Italian and Spanish, kind of like the world around them also have like a personification and identity, where it's like la mesa, la televisión, la sala, right? Like those things are things, while as like table is an object. And I think there's some
so inanimate objects that have a grammatical gender, right? Which the English language doesn't do. Yeah. So which tangent are we hitting? The gendering or the ethnic one? I mean,
let's do the ethnic one, because I do see that there is no selection for those of Latin descent. I think I'm Afro-Latino, or I believe I'm Afro-Latino, just because of like the genetics that I have, just because of the looks that I have. And I've done DNA tests, but I don't really think that those are like completely conclusive, because I don't really think it understands or is able to like really pinpoint like where your background comes from. Because like my grandfather looked black, but he was raised and born in Mexico. Yeah. And then the hair that I have looks similar to the hair in, Puerto Rico. And those people are slaves, indigenous people that are mixing, right? So like if I look like them, and then if I look like them, there has to be some part of me that like up the line, we meet somewhere. Right.
I mean, if somebody calls you on your braids and calls this cultural appropriation, then it's up to you how you want to respond to that. If your genetics show that you are Taino and Afro-Latino and Mexican, Azteco, and whatever mix there is, then you get to call your DNA card and say, hey, back off, and this is how this is legit for me. Or you can say, I was raised like that, right? I mean,
I do.
Genetics don't necessarily explain the whole story. So I'm quite careful about this. But then again, I also know about 400 years, right, of African origin people that were by all sorts of slave drivers in the New World. And how their hair has become a point of contention to this day. So as for them, it's an expression of self, whereas it's easy for a privileged white person like myself to use that as an element of style and not having the history of trouble that goes along. So that's where I would draw the line. I would be curious why a white person would prefer to wear dreadlocks. I wouldn't see the point.
Because the idea of dreadlocks in general is to break away from vanity. Like that's how it's originally used. It's like it's a way of like separating yourself from like what is true beauty, because it's the dreading of the hair that takes away. At least that's how kind of like Rastafarians did it. And I understand it's like it's a style thing, but when I hear things like that, I'm just like, I understand or I don't understand because I will never experience it. And I have experienced it to some degree, having like a curly Afro hair. It's not accepted in most places. Hair like yours gets accepted in more places than hair like mine. Yeah. It's very, very weird. And up until like the last 10 years, dreadlocks have now been accepted as appropriate business hair. And that's just in the last 10 years. But for somebody to just decide to dread their hair because that's just kind of like the aesthetic that they want to run into, I don't see any problem with that. They're not trying to be, and then that's another whole topic where it's, and I've talked about this on the podcast with previous guests, where everybody wants to kind of be black, where the culture or black culture is so beautiful and amazing and wonderful that everybody wants to be black until the cops show up. And that's a quote from a previous guest. Yep.
Yeah, and I would not contest that. That is, African American culture has permeated pop culture over the past decades. I grew up with it. I was a white kid in Germany listening to hip hop, and I came to Minnesota as an exchange student in the 80s, and the kids in school asked me, Christian, what kind of music do you listen to? And I ran down my list of songs and they were staring at me like, well, this is all black music. And I was like, really? I didn't know music had a color. I like this. What's the problem?
Yeah.
That's when I realized in the US, this is an issue that is being talked about. For me, my upbringing didn't raise that issue. So I'm going to let what I said earlier, when people have issues with other people's appropriation, that's something that I think they're happy to discuss amongst themselves. They don't need my opinion on top of that. I think as a member of the white community, even though I'm not a US person, but I'm perceived as white majority US just by my physical appearance, I want to make sure that I don't take up more space than is necessary in public, because I know that traditionally marginalized parts of this population have been kept away from public spaces for very power-grabbing reasons. And since I'm in the hunt for power, I want to be mindful that space to those who traditionally have been prevented from entering spaces. So that's how I approach it.
And I love the way that you approach it. It comes from such a place of love and such a place of an awareness of like not only your privilege, but also like because it does exist. Privilege does exist, but it exists. There's female privilege, there's male privilege, there's white male privilege, there's black male privilege. There's a lot of different privileges. So to even acknowledge like what you have around you is based off of like circumstances that were completely out of your control. Like you didn't design yourself to be this way.
Yeah, true. And the thing that comes, this is what I learned over the years. Now I'm far along in my human journey. I got smarter, I hope, over the years. What I came to realize is that people have issues about the topics that we're discussing. It often comes from a mindset of scarcity, that there is not enough of us for everybody. And I think, especially when it comes to privilege or disenfranchisement or access and equality, those who are in privilege and have been for generations are not losing anything by allowing those who have been marginalized for generations. If you allow them a seat at the table, you're not losing anything. In fact, you're gaining. And this mindset of I have to protect what's mine and I can't let them have it, whoever they are, I think that's, and it's not making us better. It's making us egotistic assholes. And forgive my strong language. I hope this is going to be okay.
Absolutely.
So there is no gain in building hedges and fences and walls. I grew up in a country that was divided into two countries by a wall and a deadly fence. So I can speak with a certain degree of authority when I say walls and fences do not work. Bridges do. Walls will come down because people seek each other out, and eventually they want freedom, they want access, they want parity and equality. And if you try to tip that balance scale by building a wall and put one part of the people who don't deserve, quote unquote, deserve there, those are in privilege, the other side, it is not sustainable. It will not last. It will eventually come down.
First thing that comes to mind is the weird phenomenon that when you have two dogs and you put a fence between them, they start barking at each other. And the minute that and they're like very aggressive and hostile because there's something in between them. The minute that you remove the barrier, they're no longer hostile towards each other.
Right. Happens to my dog, neighbor's dog on a daily basis. I have observed it every day.
If there was a hole in the fence where they could stick their head through it, it'd be mitigated. Or like a window. But you're absolutely right. Walls don't work. Bridges definitely work a lot better. There's a definite benefit of having a diversity of ideas at the table that you can then use and put into your own tool belt. And that comes at no cost to anyone. And that's, I guess, what we should genuinely strive for. I guess if I were to ask you, with all the knowledge that you have now, if you were able to send a message back to your younger self, is there anything that you would tell them about their future or what to expect, or to better prepare them for what you went through, what you experienced?
So, letter to my younger self, I would say, stop worrying about what others are thinking of you and just do it. And I used to be, and I'm a recovering, I don't want to say perfectionist, but I tend to be somebody who's overcomplicating things. And I used to be much worse when I was younger. So I think that would be my core message to my younger self, is to just loosen the handbrake, step on the throttle, and just start driving. It'll be all right.
Right. Because the Christian that today is able to hear somebody's foreign language and then just draw them to them and spark a conversation, would you be that same person 20, 30 years ago?
20, 30, yes, maybe not 40 years ago. Yeah. I mean, I've lived an international life since I was 17. So I'm 51 now. So it's been a while. And I just want to show people the beauty and the excitement and how enriching it is to engage with those who are different from us, because it will open your eyes and mind in a way you didn't know before. And you'll walk away from these interactions being a smarter, better human being, and with more love in your heart for those who you probably thought differently of before.
If you were to give the audience a resource as a book or maybe a film or something to watch in order to kind of expand on these topics, say somebody did want to get into like the cultures of others and kind of like expand their ability to communicate, which I am all completely in favor for, is there any direction you can point them in to maybe a book that changed you, or something that you think that really does help with like starting the path to growing culturally?
Well, first, I would be remiss if I wouldn't point you to a small short ebook I published a couple of years ago, 12 tips for efficient communication across cultures, or a dozen tips. That's up. You'll have the link, and you can put that in the show notes. I suspect it's perfectly doable.
I'll use it myself to make TikToks.
There we go. And there's a couple of books that I recommend. One is called Global Dexterity by a guy called Andy Molinsky. He's a teacher and professor at Brandeis University in Boston. Really like his book. He coined the concept of the phrase of zone of appropriateness. We all have a zone of behavior, a bandwidth of behavior that's appropriate to us. So we don't have a rigorous default one behavioral style. We have some flexibility, and that zone can be expanded. And when it expands, beauty happens. Global Dexterity by Andy Molinsky. And another great book is The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. She is professor at INSEAD University in Paris, but the book's written in English, and she herself is from the US. That's a really good book as well. Watch a movie if you want to this week, and watch the Kite Runner. If you haven't watched The Kite Runner yet, that would be a great film to explain cultural differences and behavioral differences and the question of obligation, expectation, guilt. Beautiful, beautiful film. A little sad, but also beautiful. Another book might be Don Miguel Ruiz, Mexican author who wrote The Four Agreements. Yep. Which are somewhat of house rules in my family, and I use it to teach our clients. One of the four agreements is to not assume, because whatever people say or do has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with them. Mm-hmm. So that's something that we do as humans. We judge other people's behavior based on assumptions and projections we have. So we judge our shit, not theirs. So that's a beautiful book that can help with that. And let me add another one, Paulo Coelho, Brazilian author who wrote The Alchemist.
Yeah, Alchemist.
That's the book I would recommend. It's not per se a cross-cultural book, but it tells the hero's journey of a young man from Spain who ventures out into the Arab world to find something that's important in his life. And upon his return, he recognizes what he's gained along the way. And it was all through cultural and interpersonal exchanges. So beautiful book as well.
Love it. You're very well read. That was the most amount of recommendations I've gotten on the podcast so far.
Oh, well then.
So being so well read, is there any quote that you often think of or you live by? I know you mentioned Don Miguel Ruiz. So did Brigida. And
she did? Okay.
Yeah, she did. It did come up in a topic. And then as soon as the conversation was over, I pulled it off of my shelf and I gifted it to my wife. And I said, here, this is the next book you're reading.
Nice. I hope she's liking it.
She does.
Is it in Spanish or in English?
In English.
Okay.
All my books are in English, unfortunately.
Okay. A quote. Well, here's a quote that I use in my marketing. It is a quote that I borrowed and modified from my daughter's English teacher. So it's not entirely mine. It's not entirely hers. It's for everyone. I tell them, my clients, I tell the world, and it's written on my market. If you don't get culture, culture will get you. Mm-hmm. And it means understanding, comprehending, making an effort to learn. If you don't do that, then culture will bite you in the ass eventually. And you might think it's a soft factor. It will derail your business if you don't look at it as a hard factor.
Especially when somebody wants to really delve into like global business. It can be such a game of mind sweep where something that you accidentally said destroyed the entire deal. Or maybe you grabbed your gum with your hand and put it in your napkin and somebody was like, nope, we're not doing that. That person is uncultured.
Well, this may or may not derail something. Often it's more persistent, repetitive behaviors that break the camel's back. And I don't know if we have 3 more minutes to give you a quick example.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a German company, family-owned, mid-sized company, less than 5,000 employees globally, and they have operations around the world. They're an automotive supplier. They already have a production base in North America, and they're building a second one in the U.S. South currently. It's an $85 million investment for this new plant, which is a huge deal for the Polish company. It's probably their biggest single investment they've done. And they brought in a senior manager from Germany to the site. And now his boss calls me and says, alarm, alarm, red flag, red alert. My German guy that I brought over and who's highly competent and who we thought has got this down in his sleep, he is scaring people. People are leaving left and right, and it's not a good work environment. Not that he's a bad person. He simply does not understand U.S. Southern culture. I need your help. So this is not a soft factor anymore. This is an $85 million factor. If this guy doesn't get it soon, he either will have to be replaced, which will cost the company a shit ton of money, or that project fails. They don't want to lose 85 million. Right?
No, no one does.
Right. So that's how this is applied in my world, right? So we can talk these beautiful movies and those nice books and about inclusiveness and equality and whether or not cultural appropriation is okay or not. These are all relevant conversations to have. When people come to me, their motivation is none of that. Their motivation is to save $85 million.
I love it. Yeah, the questions I had was just because of your vast knowledge of culture. I just wanted to poke your brain about some of the questions that are in my head.
And they're all connected. I'm not saying these live in isolation, different silos, but this is, if you look at it through the lens of businesses where this train of thought is leading, it is immediately bottom line relevant.
Absolutely, because with the amount of people that you're going to come with and how interconnected we are nowadays, it's hard not to find somebody who's coming from a third world country or a first world country, whatever, coming from just a different place and then assimilating into the US. It's very common in tech where they bring people in from India and from China, or from Singapore, and then they work here and they have to assimilate to the same office cultures that we're used to. And they've never seen an episode of The Office before, by the way. It's like, it's one of the best. And it's a funny work environment because even though it's obviously over exaggerated, we all have worked with somebody who's like that. But in America, it's not something that you're not going to have people like that in other countries. Maybe in Europe, but no, I highly doubt somebody from Japan has like a Stanley in their office.
Maybe, but if you're bringing in people from India, they will most likely expect there to be a easy to recognize hierarchy, and usually U.S. workplaces don't show that level of stratification, not openly. There might be one, but it takes you months to figure out who is who and why are they important. And that will frustrate your Indian coworkers at first because they don't know who's boss, and they will always defer to the upline and are looking, where is that person and how do I best interact with them?
Interesting, because it's almost like they have to have it. They can't just be free and independent of like researching on their own. But it's customary. It's built into like all of their learning since they were born.
It's their normal.
It's their normal. Yeah. We go back to how what's normal for one is totally different from someone else.
Right. And you have some family history in Latin America, right, Nate? So this is very similar in Mexican culture or Mesoamerican culture. You talk to Salvadorians or Hondurans or Nicaraguans.
So different.
They also,
they're so different. Their Spanish is different, and they all have a form of rice and beans that's called something different. But it's all rice and beans every time. It's like it's casamiento, it's revuelta, it's...
Well, it could be arroz con frijoles, it could be arroz con habichuelas, right? It depends on which bean it is too, doesn't it?
Exactly. And then that differentiates across all of South Central America. And like my wife, for example, she's born in Yucatan. Yucatan is the southernmost part of Mexico, and they are the Texas of Mexico, where if you're born in Yucatan, you're not Mexican, you are from Yucatan. Like it's one of those things.
Is she Mayan? Does she have Mayan origins?
She speaks Mayan, and she understands it and can speak it a little bit. Her parents can speak fluently, but it's in a updated dialect. But it is Mayan.
Yes, and it's recognized as an official language in Yucatan, right? And in Quintana Roo as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is very cool because like she's taught me a couple of words in Maya, and she can actually watch the movie Apocalypto and understand what they're saying.
Fascinating,
isn't it?
Well, I hope I meet her soon.
I hope so too. I told Brigitte I promised that I would attend one of your courses because the experience that I had in NLP was with Johnny and New Peaks, and I don't think it's as great as yours. I don't think it even compares. I think that y'all do real NLP work. And what I got was like a little cupcake breakfast. You know what I'm saying?
Well, now you just opened the floodgates to a whole nother topic, which I hope my wife exhausted on her episode with you. Yeah, and the short answer to your question is yes.
Yes, would love to. Love it. And I'm hoping to come visit at Atlanta. I'm glad that you're doing such amazing things, especially with what you are building and your projects that you're working with. And I'm so happy that you've just like created your own lanes, that you all have been just thriving since we've met and have only increased and only continued to get better. I do have some questions to round us out on our podcast. Do you have, I guess, first question would be, what is one of the most worthwhile investments you ever made? And this could be money, time, energy, whatever resource. But what would you say is one of the best or most worthwhile investments that you've ever made?
One would be in self-development, which when we did it, I was highly reluctant to do that. Brigitte probably my wife tells that story better than I can. She took me to a self-development course which was labeled as free. And I knew intuitively that there is no such thing as a free lunch. So there's going to be a back end offer, and they're going to try to sell me on something that I don't want. And I walked into that place with my arms and legs crossed, simply to find myself to buy the biggest item that was offered during that weekend. And I had maybe 2.5 minutes of buyer's remorse, which surprised me. And I'm happy that I did it, because it shifted a lot within me. It set me on a more focused course for myself and for my family. So that would be a very worthwhile investment. If you're out there looking for self-improvement and self-development, make sure you vet who you're engaging with. There's
100%.
There's some snake oil handlers out there that I would be weary of in if I were you. And there are some good folks out there with great intentions and also great follow through. So make sure you vet it well before you put your money down, and know that self-development is an ongoing life's journey, and you want to start it somewhere, and that somewhere will be right for you when it shows up. There is no prescriptive path for that. And another worthwhile investment, I would say, is real estate. It is, we're building an asset that is creating wealth and maintaining wealth, not consuming it, right? And this is something I learned later in life. I come from a privileged environment where consumption and showing your consumption and labels and experiences and travel and car and clothes and food was important to play the game, until I realized all of this might be nice to enjoy while it happens. And I still do that on occasion. And yet it's consuming and not creating and building. So I think real estate is a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, those are awesome things to both invest in. I loved how you touched upon with the personal development part, how there are people who are snake oil salesmen or who take advantage of it. I believe the only episode that you've listened to is that one where I talk about how some places aren't really the best, have the best of intentions, but there are people out there who are doing amazing things, and I name drop them, and you and your wife are both in that list of people who, like, I respect.
Thank you for doing that.
Great intention, and I love what y'all are doing, and I think there needs to be more people like this who have the knowledge and the skill set that you have, and are able to then bring it to the people. Because I need to learn from more Christians. I need to learn from more Brigidas. I need to learn from more James McNeils, right?
May I suggest changing one word in that sentence? Replace need with want.
Or need with want. I want to learn from more of people like you. And this is part of the podcast journey. And this is why I do what I do, because I do have this insatiable need and want to learn and expand myself so that I can be the best person that I can possibly be. And I genuinely love conversations with people like you, because it expands my thoughts. You give me new perspectives. You give me greater understanding of myself and the world around me. And that's genuinely all that I'm about.
So as you begin this path of self-development, if you start dipping your toe in it, you will quickly recognize the water is beautiful, and just the toe ain't enough. So you'll find yourself fully immersed in water anyway soon. And you'll also learn that it's not a one-time thing. Once you start doing this, once you want to improve your behaviors, you want to learn how to communicate with more ease and elegance and less effort, then this becomes a lifelong practice, because the more you see the light, the more you recognize that you haven't seen it all yet. It's this old ancient Greek wisdom, and here's the European speaking. I'm sure there's old Asian African wisdoms as well, or Native American wisdoms that I'm not as aware of, but this ancient Greek wisdom of I don't know anything, and I'm an empty vessel to fill up with knowledge. So that's a long process, right? So I applaud anyone who's to take that journey. I'm
Love it. And just to end on a lighthearted note, is there any unusual habit or absurd thing that you just absolutely love?
An absurd thing that I absolutely love.
Yeah.
Well, this may sound generic, but ask my wife and she'll tell you how absurd she is. Football. And with football, I mean that sport that people play with their feet, and the object of play is a sphere-shaped object. Oh. So I'm not talking about throwing an egg-shaped thing. I'm talking about the real
soccer.
Football. Soccer as some...
football.
Football, football, foosball, calcio. Yes, please. The absurdity of it, of 11 people on a team chasing around a rectangular field of grass for 90 minutes is superbly absurd, and I love it.
Who's your favorite team?
FC Bayern München, Munich.
Nice. Did you ever get to attend a World Cup?
I will try to attend the World Cup in North America when it comes to the US. I live in Atlanta, so we hope to be hosting a World Cup game in Atlanta. It's not set in stone yet, but chances are good. I hope to attend as many football games as possible. It's the beautiful game, and it brings cultures together. It is, you attend a football game, Atlanta United FC game here in the city, and the stands are full of people from all corners of the world because they all enjoy the beautiful game. And that's what I love about it. It's a game that brings people together.
I love it, Christian. Thank you so much for being on this episode. Thank you so much for letting me pick your brain and having such a wonderful and beautiful conversation with me. I absolutely adore you and appreciate you. Tell the people where they can find you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for enduring me, because I get to talk about this for days at end. How do people engage with me is find me on the socials. So look for my name. It's in the episode description. You'll find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Those are probably the four that are most relevant to my world. You find us on our website. It's theculturemastery.com. So the is part of the name, no dash or hyphens. It's one word, theculturemastery.com. And you find me in Atlanta. Call me and give me an hour notice so I can get dressed when you show up
at your lovely home. I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you, Christian, again for being on this episode. And I really appreciate you. And I look forward to us crossing paths IRL again in the future.
Yes, would love to. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate that.
Of course. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Carpe Natem Podcast. If you loved this episode, please consider leaving a positive rating and review on Apple Music or iTunes. It takes 30 seconds for you, but for us, it helps spread positivity to more people during these chaotic times. It helps build a community, and it makes me smile from ear to ear. Speaking of community, we have a Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Carpe Natem. Just answer the 3 questions to get some access to extra motivation and inspiration for your timeline. If you would like to support the podcast, screenshot this episode, share to your story, and tag me on Instagram at Carpe Natem 114. That's going to be my handle across all platforms, including TikTok. If you would like to give me a follow, I definitely would appreciate it. If you haven't already, please rate us and subscribe on Spotify or anywhere you enjoy your podcasts. And lastly, you can find all episodes, linked to resources and opportunities for coaching and mentoring from me at carpenatem114.com. I cannot thank you enough for spending part of your day with me. You are all rock stars, taking the necessary steps to be your best selves, willing to do whatever it takes, and ready to grab life by the butt cheeks. So until next time, this is Nate Hoya-Reynoso signing off.